Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Quesada. I'm OUTFRONT South Florida Sales Director, here to moderate our Influenced by OUTFRONT panel. Today's topic is the growing influence of the multicultural market. OUTFRONT's celebration to the Hispanic Heritage Month, which kicked off September 15th. I'm joined today by a fantastic group of panelists who all were inaugural honorees of our Spirit of Orgullo campaign, running on Billboard. I'll let them introduce themselves. We'll start with you, Gabriela.
Hi, everyone. I'm Gabriela McCoy, and it's so nice to be here. And first of all, a big thank you to OUTFRONT. I'm truly proud and honored to be part, a first-generation Venezolana and to be part of the Spirit of Orgullo campaign. And really, it's not only about celebrating today's Latino leaders, but really about all the people that paved our way forward. So thank you. And just quickly, a little bit about me. I was born in Caracas, Venezuela, a very curious little creature that never suffered from stranger danger. So it's not a surprise that I ended up in a career studying people. And currently I'm the US Director of Patron, Grey Goose, and the agave portfolio of Bacardi and Insights and Analytics. And I work on understanding how Bacardi can connect with people in more meaningful ways and be part of creating moments that matter. So thank you very much.
Stacie.
Hola a todos, my name is Stacie deArmas. I am at Nielsen, and I too, Gabby, like you, so honored to be part of this inaugural campaign. I was in Miami last week, and of course, immediately went to where I knew one of the billboards were so that I could capture some images for my family. So I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you so very much. A little about me. I am first generation Cubana. My father was raised in Cuba and came to the United States as many people did in the 1960s. I have had the opportunity to grow up here, but deeply within the culture from my family. Nielsen, I have been in Hispanic and diverse marketing for the entirety of my career, so more than 20 years. I've been with Nielsen the majority of that time, and I've focused on diverse and inclusive measurement and representation, both within our work and within our panels. Today, I sit in a wonderful spot in our DE&I team, managing all of our inclusive insights and initiatives. And so that spans from looking at diverse attributes of content to understanding what it is that audiences are attracted to when they're looking at content, what they're interested in, what's driving inclusion in content. Thank you again for the opportunity to be here today and to share a little bit about Nielsen's perspective to advance inclusive and diverse marketing.
Thank you. And Pedro.
Hi, everybody. I'm Pedro Lerma. I am the founder, CEO of Lerma. We're an advertising agency based in Dallas. I too am honored that I've been included in that campaign. It is something that is growing up here. I grew up here in Texas. My parents are from Mexico, and being honored in this way is just something that I'm incredibly proud of, and I tend to want to show that to my parents and have them be proud of me too. It's great to be a part of it. So thank you for that. We again are an advertising agency in Dallas. Some of our clients include Anheuser-Busch, InBev. We do some work there with their innovation group, so creating new products, which is a lot of fun. Avocados from Mexico is one of our long-standing client relationships. Ocean Spray recently were named the agency of record for the Salvation Army, which is something that we're really excited about. The Home Depot is a long-time client relationship of ours, and a newer client is Warner Media. And one of the bits of work we've done for them is something that I hope to talk about a little bit in our conversation today. So thanks again for having me.
Awesome, thank you. Quick reminder to submit all questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, and we'll get to as many questions as possible at the end of the discussion. So before we dive in, a little background on today's topic of multicultural market. Data from 2020 census shows that consumer buying power is more diverse than ever. The collective buying power of Hispanics, Blacks, Asian American, and Native Americans has reached $3.9 trillion and is growing. Hispanics alone make up $1.9 trillion of those dollars. in order to tap into how these consumers work, brands need to really consult on what makes them so different, whether it's culture and customs or experiences and languages. So question for you, Gabriela. How do we unveil insights that lead to emotional storytelling and that achieve contextual content relevance?
That's a really good question. Insights is a passion of mine. And when I think of the highest level of understanding how brands can unveil insights that connect with people in meaningful ways, I know it's going to sound very dramatic, but I always say this, our connection with humanity is broken. You know, as brand marketeers, we try to quantify people and categorize them and then like create these crazy algorithms to predict people who are very unpredictable and people who have cozier and messier and imperfect lives, very human. And the fact that we call people consumers, and it's very much a part of the vernacular, is a key indicator of our broken brands. To give you the other side of it, conversely, if we think about, in our case, our drinkers as humans, we're connecting with them. And I always say this, consumers are for transactions and humans are for connection. And then let's talk a little bit about the multicultural market. So let's push this a little bit further. It's not only about shifting our mindset of seeing people as humans, it's also about moving away from assuming that cultures are monolithic, that a person living in Mexico is the same as a Mexican American, and that a Colombiana is the same as a Venezolana. And we know that the best arepas are Venezolanas arepas, but it's completely different. So I want to give you a real life example of how we look at it at Bacardi. If you were to think about it as a consumer monolithic perspective, we would talk about a premium tequila Hispanic female consumer that's average age of 34 and drinks tequila cocktails while connecting with family. So you can see kind of, it's a very monolithic way of categorizing all Hispanic females together. Or conversely, if we shift our mindset and we start to think and speak human, this is how it would go. The first thing is, one of the most meaningful parts of my job is that I get to take off my shoes and sit in people's living rooms and just talk to them and hear their stories. So the example that I'm going to give you that's very human is of Amelia, a real example of me sitting down with a Mexican-American woman who invited me in her house. So I described to you the wrong way, and here's the better way. Amalia, she's a second-generation Mexican-American. She's always finding a reason to celebrate over boisterous laughs and parties and the delicious smells, the background of all her family recipes and spontaneous dancing and vibrant music. And at core, she believes bringing the best tequila, like a patron, is a gesture of love and appreciation that she can offer, and that tequila is a perfect spirit to match the vibrance and kind of the conviviality of the moment. So the key takeaway here is, as you can see by this example, really shifting our mindset to a human-centric approach with an understanding that cultures are nuanced, not monolithic, really leads to this type of emotional storytelling and much more deep and meaningful way of brands to communicate with humans. So
I love that. I think we all as humans connect with something that we represent or cause our attention. So the fact to tap into that, really sets the right footsteps. Pedro, do you see this with your clients at Lerma?
Sorry, I was the guy on mute. The answer is yes. And I love what Gabriela said about humanity. The way we think about it is, we really want to celebrate the audience. I don't want to use the word consumers because Gabriela will get on to me, but
I will say no to the C word, no C word here.
We really want to celebrate, who our targets are. And, what we do a lot of times is we will find interesting ways to talk about them. And so one example is one of our target audiences is fierce fiesteras. And I don't know which brand within the Bacardi portfolio that might fit, but it's an idea that, we're trying to reach a young, empowered Latina who's out there making things happen on her own terms. And at the same time, she is celebratory, and she wants to be celebrated and recognized. And in looking at the audience that way, you can find interesting ways to connect. Another on the other end of the spectrum, somebody that is perhaps a mom, we might call loving luchadoras or something along those lines. And I think when you're able to do that, it comes first from truly understanding who the audience is, what drives them, where the intersections are between the values of that audience and the brand. But when you land there and you create, these imageries, you're able to then go away and come up with creative that's going to be a whole lot more interesting and unexpected. I think it's easy for people, for brands to land in territory that is expected, that is somewhat stereotypical, and we have a rule here in our agency, and that is, don't bring me any parrilladas. I don't want to see another commercial or another ad, over a grill. And so, yes, it's happening, and I think it's incumbent on us as professionals to push our clients to do that.
That's amazing. Stacie, how are brands doing this, and can Nielsen help?
Well, I think Gabriela and Pedro gave really good examples of how brands are doing it, but I can tell you what we're doing at Nielsen to make that journey for brands easier, right? To illuminate some of that data. And Gabriela, you opened it so perfectly. I had intended to talk about something else, but I love where you started, so I'm gonna shift the narrative. Today, for example, Nielsen released its annual Latino report. And like you and Pedro, like what you've suggested, we also have recognized that breaking down the monolith is not only incredibly important, but it's timely, right? If there was any message that we got this year, the Latino community specifically, and I'm not talking, overall our Black and Brown brothers and sisters have been advocating for visibility of intersectional communities and for social justice for a long time, but our community specifically this year, of all the messages, the one that resounded the most was recognition of our cultural plurality, right? Who we are intersectionally. We opened with who each of us were individually, our backgrounds, and increasingly our not just our country of origin, but that's certainly an important part of how we approach everything, right? Not only just brands and products, but also how we consume content and what's meaningful and what matters. So I think as brands are becoming more sophisticated in this space, what Nielsen is aiming to do is to resource brands with some of that more granular data around who our communities are when we break them down. This year's report focuses for the first time ever on some really, really intersectional communities and identity, data and information around them. Afro-Asian, right? And of course, Afro-Latino, Afro-Asian, and Cubano community, different communities who this year had some very significant and meaningful events that to the larger Hispanic diaspora would maybe just have gone, perhaps not unnoticed, but it wasn't as much of a very like a close to their hearts. And Gabby, the story that you opened with too, it makes me think of, I'm proud. It's exciting as a researcher in this space to see brands coming along, but also content developers too. At Nielsen, we're often known for our audience measurements, and we do measure audiences. We provide data on who's watching what, very important, and not just who, but really the community within. We actually can break that down that monolith quite a bit. But we also are focusing now, we made an announcement earlier this year, focusing on the attributes of content that are meaningful. Representation in content on screen, behind the screen, below the line, in the writer's room, and how having perhaps a predominantly Latino cast, having a Latino showrunner influences not just consumption of that content by our community, but also how our community perceives themselves represented in content. just like Gabby was talking about how brands have now become more sophisticated about looking at our community, Nielsen too is more sophisticated about breaking that down to give you attributes of content that are meaningful. Brands are engaged, they're in this game. And even, hearing both from Pedro and Gabriela, it's so exciting to know that our entire industry, not just corners of it, have, really wrapped our arms around the need to break this monolith down.
Stacie, just to say, I want to say that we are big fans at Bacardi of Nielsen. You guys are BFFs. We use your data. It's not only qualitative data, for sure, the quant side, and your reports are so inspiring. I can't wait to see my inbox and go ahead and have a look at the new report released today.
It'll be there. It'll be there as soon as we're done, as soon as we're done here.
Amazing. I mean, I think it makes total sense when we speak about neighborhoods and we keep talking about communities. I think it's overseen how many different dialects and ethnicities really make up the Hispanic and Latin communities. We've seen many brands do this successfully in out of home, especially here where I'm from, Miami. Using Spanglish in creative has become, almost a norm for a local client. One of my favorite campaigns that we've ran has been for Estrella Insurance, which is using Cuban-born musicians in their bus media creative with a Spanglish version of the word insurance to pronounce insurance, which is like that broken English, to resonate with the Miami Cuban-American population. That being said, researchers show that 75% of consumers are more likely to buy a brand or off a brand that has people that they could relate to that looks like them in the actual ad. Pedro, do brands create an authentic experience for audiences, which also demonstrates dedication to the actual consumer?
They can. I would say they don't always, but they absolutely can. But that comes from really digging in, understanding your audience, understanding your geography, understanding where your brand is in relation to that audience. A brand that is brand new to a Hispanic audience probably needs to be more careful than a brand that has been in the community, that has earned the right to speak, in a little bit more colloquial language. And so I think it's kind of a typical agency answer to questions, which the answer is it depends. So it depends on, again, the brand, where it is in its maturation with the market. But it can be done. It can be done effectively. It can be done in a charming way. It just, I would suggest to any marketer out there trying to figure out that they make sure that they're engaging experts to help them navigate this territory.
Makes sense. Stacie, can you talk a little bit more about the type of content attributes that are drawing diverse audiences?
Sure. And so I kind of teed it up in the last conversation, but one thing that is really exciting that we're able to do now is take a piece of content and deconstruct it. So I'm not a big sports fan, but I can liken it to maybe fantasy baseball or fantasy football, where you can select, the different members of your team that you're putting together to have outcomes that are far better, perhaps, than if you just grabbed a team off the shelf, right? So in the same way, we're able to break down content at Nielsen and look at the different attributes that are driving consumption by our community. So we talked earlier about, storylines and story narratives and themes. But from the content perspective, if you're a brand and you're evaluating where is the best place for your brand to be, either through a brand placement or a partnership, or maybe just traditional advertising, it's increasingly important, just like the way we've talked about breaking the community down into breaking down the monolith and really looking through a new lens, to do the same really with content, right? You want your brand to be aligned with content that isn't just great, but is meaningful and resonates with the audience. And so we see increasingly that this is becoming a really important attribute that agencies and brands are looking for. The days of just standard ad placements are gone, and I think it's a good thing. Pedro has this experience every day, and Gabby's living it, where I think we have to acknowledge there are some brands that are newer into this space and perhaps are still there, and that's great. And we're all there with resources to walk them through that knowledge journey. But the brands that are already ahead are reaping tremendous benefits and are seeing it in their ROI.
Amazing. I agree. I mean, I think as an out-of-home company, that just the reason of trying to cater to that specific target allows us kind of to, be embedded within the community. It puts us in a position where we're tapping into these neighborhoods, we're tapping into these these families and becoming part of their household. Gabriela,
exactly, and we're talking. I kind of ignored the local angle. I was talking about content, so we're all thinking about TV, but local, and the example you gave earlier with the bus bench, and actually in our report, which you'll all see, we talk specifically around what we saw in certain markets, not every market, around the events of July 11th and the week following, right? In some markets, and you can imagine which ones, we saw the highest days of radio listening, of the year. And we know that's because people tuned in. You can get that news in a lot of places, but they wanted that local connection to what was happening now, right? And I think outdoor media does the same thing. It's in the market, it knows the market. And you can tell that. I mentioned that I was in Miami last week. I mean, the flavor and feel of outdoor media in the market is spot on, and it's appropriate, and frankly, wouldn't necessarily play the same way as it would in my hometown in Los Angeles. That's what makes it valuable.
1,000%. And I think that's one of my favorite questions I get asked when, deciding creative. Do I do English? Do I do Spanish? My answer is always, let's do both, because at the end of the day, that's what's going to resonate with that audience. Gabriela, a question to you. Which brands do you think are setting the gold standard in terms of driving insight to resonate with different cultures?
So thinking about the whole conversation, and the two things that I think that really drive deep human insights is, like I said, brands that speak human, and brands that steer away from a monolithic perspective and more into a nuanced cultural perspective. And for me, I am in love with this brand. It's Pantene. I don't know if you guys saw this, the Pantene Hair Has No Gender campaign. And Stacie, if there's one that's meaningful and resonated so well with audiences, it was this one. They basically went from looking at hair as a protein that grows out of the follicles of different types of people's heads to kind of this deep-rooted, sorry, no pun intended, I didn't even do it on purpose, a deep-rooted insight that hair is an expression of identity and self-expression. They work with transgender and non-gender conforming communities. And basically they shared their personal stories of real people with their own fabulous expressions of hair. And they talked a lot about the role of the hair plays in their lives. And the reason that this resonated so strongly and so loudly was that the insight was based on connecting its products to the community in a very nuanced way. And one of the things that I would like, I gave you an example, and I want to give some kind of idea of how I envision that they did this. It's basically by doing three things. Number one, I imagine that their boardroom and all the people that work, whether it's an insights person or a media person or a brand person, there are people there that are mirrors of the audience that they want to speak to. So that's number one. Number two, it's not only a mirror, but and it's not only about the diversity, but also the equity. So the mirror has to have a voice, or else it's just performative. And then the last thing is not only a mirror of the people that you serve, not only giving a true voice to those people that are, working on the brand, but also having a freaking budget against it. If you truly believe in developing into the multicultural insight community and having deep insights, you got to put where your money, where your mouth is.
Yeah, A great example, and I do remember that campaign, amazing campaign. So question to all of us. What are you all doing on behalf of your brands and your clients to ensure cultural contextual relevance?
Well, I'd like to jump in just to follow up on what Gabby said. Gabby, we just have to get together, Gabriela. We have I feel like this is just like a fast friendship. We're even hearing you talk in the beginning about, the research that you're doing on identity. I wrote down identity formation because I feel like that's another, one of the things we take so lightly is we think, well, yeah, we all know media is really important and what people see, can inform society and all of that. But if you really break it down, what is presented in content, and I feel like I've talked all about content, so we'll shift and talk about the community in a minute, but what is presented in content, how we are presented in content, Latinos specifically, not only forms our identity, right? It informs our identity formation, so how we see ourselves, what we think we're capable of, but it also informs how those outside of our identity, our cultural group, our identity group, create their formation of who they believe we are. And if you think about how much we've talked about, the stereotypical presentations, and not even that's been a long running dialogue in the marketing communities, but even the lack of visibility, it helps us understand why perhaps the country is at where it's at. And this is really like a sociology perspective. This is us, taking our hats off as, perhaps, consumer, there's the bad C word, researchers, and let's look at this as a psychologist or someone who studies demography and the development of communities. And so Gabriela, when you opened talking about humanity, I was like, we're done. She and I, this is great. We're on the same page so much, because I feel like that's something that, identity formation is so big. So who can take that on, Gustavo and Pedro? Who can take that on? The people that actually have the greatest power in this space are brands. It's not even content developers. They have a tremendous role for sure. But if brands aren't investing in that content, then, and that's, I feel like the idea of breaking down content, as we've been talking about, puts the power in the hands of the brands to say, yes, no, that's not the representation we want our brand to be in. And in another way, we're driving the society that we want to exist. So I feel like there's a really important component there about our work, that we're talking about what we're doing for brands, and we're building communities and we're investing, but we're also at the risk of sounding, sort of grandiose, we're really doing work that is informing societal change. And we underestimate that work sometimes as brands. The way you talked about loving luchadores, I was just like, oh, that's me. That luchadora, that's who I am. I'm the mom that I'm, and I'm like, come at me if it's for my kids, let's go, because I will advocate for them come what may. And hearing you, Gabby, talk about, the home that you went into, redefining it, that's what we need to see more of in content, and brands are caring and investing in that. And then of course, we want the audiences that are consuming that content and loving their presentation and content. That's the full circle.
That's amazing. On that note, guys, we could open it up for some Q&A, which we've already gotten a few amount of questions, and I'll go ahead and start the questions off. I'm going to start with you, Gabriela. What can companies do internally to facilitate diversity and inclusion initiatives?
Sure. So obviously, we know that the pandemic, women were disproportionately impacted and hit hardest early on, and specifically, at least within our industry, restaurants, retail, and hospitality are industries where there's a lot of women. And so we were really, really hit. And one of the things that was very impacting is that Latinas, specifically Latinas, were one of the most that were disproportionately impacted minorities, dropping out at much more accelerated rates versus other ethnicities. And look, long term, I think the basics of, creating spaces where everyone is treated fairly, everyone has, equal opportunity, all of those things are super, super important. And they're kind of like the minimum, the absolute minimum. But when I think about what we can do today, we can create within our own companies and around us, whether, wherever you work at, and be a mom fan. Actually looking for active ways to help moms across the board. And I mean, it's very simple. It's like several things that you can do that can immediately start to impact and help retain moms in the workforce. It's, offering part-time scheduled or unpaid leaves, giving moms flexibility, defaulting to assuming that people don't have extra care or childcare. I'm a single mom. I don't really have, much help that way. So not assuming that, helping find ways to, help them pay for childcare, being a little bit more liberal when it comes to, taking care of their kids. For example, if there's promotions, accept that some people have life constraints and give flexibility so women can be promoted. Remind moms, to take vacation time. We already feel, guilty when we have to, we're the ones that are responsible to have to take the kids to, doctor's appointments. Forgive imperfections. One of the things that, regardless of the job, whether, your Instacart, your VP, your CMO, Uber, we are juggling so much as Latinas and as moms, and it's forgiveness sometimes for us. And the last thing that I want to say is, I always say is empathy makes the world go round. Listen and support with empathy. Sometimes we just need people to understand, our situation and really care and want to help. So again, it's doing the fundamentals of, diversity and inclusion and equity within the workspace, but just as equally important as becoming a mom fan.
That was amazing response, Gabriela. So totally support the statement. Pedro, question. What are the biggest creative do's and don'ts when designing campaigns for multicultural audiences?
I would say the do's are to truly commit to your Hispanic audience. Hire experts. I mentioned that earlier, but it's important because I think a lot of times brands try to take shortcuts. They think maybe a translation will suffice. And I think what Gabriela said earlier, fund the work. So those are the do's. The don'ts would be, don't look at this as a box checking exercise. Truly commit to your audience. Don't skimp on production or your media investment. And don't only do it during Hispanic Heritage Month. That's a huge don't. I mean, if you're going to get out there, it needs to be a year-long commitment, just to get going and keep it going, because we're here to stay.
You mean we don't just come out in September? Stacie, I have a question for you. What does Nielsen know about platforms preferences for differences for content consumption when it comes to diverse communities?
Well, I think we all know that, Latinos are increasingly, and there I go with the monolith, but this one is true, right? Because we're so much younger, using more digital avenues for content, more likely to be cord cutters, more than a third. So I think that creates really great opportunities for brands when they're thinking about where they're aligning their content or their creative, right? Because of course you want to be in traditional television, traditional television, you want to be in streaming content, but it also opens up this really interesting opportunity to use social and even messaging platforms in a way that is not just, partnering with an influencer. That's very important. There are great influencers, but there is really a lot of strategy in this space now. And when it comes to diaspora communities, in particular Latino communities, these alternative platforms are not only a primary resource for content, which we've talked a lot about, but also for news and for information. And we don't necessarily need to get into today what some of the risks of that then are, right? If we know there's some fact checking limitations around content and language, But what it does mean for brands and advertisers is that there's so many more opportunities to not just integrate your brand, but to do something super creative and fun, because you have more of the community in this younger set that is consuming content on these more diverse platforms. So, it certainly opens up opportunity. And in outdoor media, really, I would consider part of that because it's visual, it's mobile. There's unlimited opportunity outside of traditional media.
Amazing. This is a question to all. What are your predictions for the future of multicultural marketing?
Pedro,
I would say,
yeah, that's yours.
I would say we're taking over. The future is multicultural. I think the census only underscores and reinforces what we've known for a long time. For the first time since I read a statistic that said since 1790 was the first time that the white non-Hispanic population had declined. And so it's been that long, and that has happened for the first time while Hispanic, Asian, Black communities have all increased in population. So Mark Pritchard, Procter & Gamble CMO, says it frequently. He says, if you're not doing multicultural marketing today, you're not doing marketing. And so the future is multicultural. We as multicultural experts should embrace that, take up that flag, and make sure that we are getting the attention that we need from the C-suite, the budgets that we need from the CFO, and making the right connections between brands and their customers.
And if I could add to that, I would say, yes, the country is incredibly diversifying. Census tells us that, but so is our own community, right? With 6.3% of all Latinos in the US are Afro-Latino, nearly 2% are Asian Latino. And among our group, we have a large majority that are that have Mexican heritage, but a tremendous amount from South America, from Central America, and from the Caribbean. And so the more that we start to really take a look at who we are in the context of America and how we are driving America's evolution, the demographic evolution of this country, I think the more power we will have, and hopefully the more investment that brands will make in our community and in ensuring that we're represented in their creative as well.
Amazing. I have a question also open to anybody. What has been your favorite campaign with your current company so far? So, I guess Gabriela with Bacardi.
I would say early on in my career, I've been at Bacardi 6 years, and the first 2 years, I worked on global Bacardi rums. And it was a brand that was in 7 years of contiguous decline. And it was a brand that nobody really knew what it stood for. And we went and did a bunch of a lot of research around the world. I got to go to India, all over the world. It was amazing. And I think I'm most proud of that campaign because it was a moment where we really and truly listened to our people and our drinkers and our humans. Originally, the campaign was called Do What Moves You. I don't know if you guys have heard about it, Do What Moves You, but it was going to be, it was another tagline. It was Come As You Are. That was what it was going to be launched as. And our consumers called BS on it. They were like, what does that even mean? It can't be that. And it was truly as a result of listening to them, understanding how our brand could connect to them. And that's what Do What Moves You was inspired. And even during the pandemic, we launched an extension of the campaign, which was literally tying cameras around the people who were in the spot in the TV commercial, and letting them show us how they partied and how they put together, a rooftop party, with all the constraints of what was going on with COVID. but nevertheless, it was beautiful. At the end of the day, I guess the key takeaway was there's no pandemic that can stop you from, whether it's remote or together, getting together with the people that you love and celebrating that.
Amazing. Pedro, I have a question for you. Traditionally, the ad spend towards Hispanic consumer strategies is not represented to our total population. How do we overcome this disparity?
I think,
Gabriela, feel free to jump in as well.
I think we just have to keep pushing. I don't think there's a silver bullet for this. I feel like 2020 was a year of multicultural awakening, and I think it has played out in lots of positive ways for us as audience members, as marketing professionals. Companies did some soul searching, and they came back and they said, look, we are going to be more diverse, equitable, and inclusive. We're going to commit more meaningfully to our multicultural audiences. And some of that has meant investing in marketing and advertising. Some of it has meant investing in community programs. But it has set the tone for us to then go back to our clients and make them accountable for investing the right way. The consumers are going to make the brands accountable, and I think as their agency representatives, it's our job to let them, or I guess, to push them before they get pushed by their consumers. I am more optimistic about the future of multicultural marketing experts, Hispanic marketing experts, African-American marketing experts. It is a land and a time of opportunity, and it's up to us to go and seize it.
Awesome. On that note, guys, thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you to this amazing panelist. Thank you all who are watching. There will be a recorded video that everybody could access on OUTFRONT.com. And on that note, hope everybody has an amazing day. Wrap up Hispanic Heritage Month with a bang, and see you all soon. Thank you, guys.
Gracias.
Thank you. Gracias. Ciao.